Sanjeev, welcome and thank you for taking
Thank you.
our time.
Thank you for calling
Thank
me.
Sanjeev, life journeys fascinate me, and I feel there is a lot of learning that all of us can have from journeys that different people actually take over their lives, the learnings they have, the challenges they have, their motivations, and how that journey has shaped them. So I hope you will indulge me with some time talking about the life journey, and I'll ask you very, very specific questions if that's fine.
Sure thing.
So we know a lot about Sanjeev as an adult. Would love to start with Sanjeev as a child and get to know a little bit more about your childhood. What was it like? What were you as a child? Maybe some endearing memories from your childhood.
Oh, boy. So look, I'm 58 and I have lived 54 years in Delhi. Barring 2 years in Bombay in my first job in the mid 80s, and then subsequently 2 years in Ahmedabad when I was studying, I have lived all my life in Delhi. Right. So father was a doctor in the government. Mom was a homemaker, one elder brother, one elder sister. We grew up mostly in government colonies. Right. Till the time I was 21, I was living in government colonies mostly. And therefore, you were shaped by the environment around you. So all my friends came from all over India because it's central government employees are from all over India. And everyone is middle class. So standard middle class values, study hard, work hard. You have to make it in life through education. There's nothing to inherit. So it's up to you. Right? All we can do is try and get you to a good school, and then it's up to you. So parents always sort of encouraged and us to study and work hard. And yeah, games were character building, not for making a career. And I went to a school, which is an all-boys school, St. Columbus in Delhi, where, just big on discipline, big on character building, high on academics, and big on corporate punishment. So you got caned if you didn't do your homework, right? There was this guy who would hang around with large stapler, and in those days, bell bottoms were in fashion. So if your flares were more than 23 inches, he would come and staple them. And you weren't allowed to grow your hair above your ears. I don't have a problem now, but right, you weren't allowed to. So if you had a pair of scissors, and so you just cut it from one side. So you go through the rest of the day embarrassed, and so you learn not to have long hair. You learn to not wear very fashionable clothes, and it was and you focused on studies, right? And it was an all boys school. All good boys did science. Okay, humanities were for the women and or the poor, the male students who couldn't do well in academics, and commerce was it was okay, but it was not really for the best students. There were some of the very best students did go to commerce, so I took science with bio to keep my options open, and I got into IIT because it was a done thing. You want to in that school, you want a real man if you didn't get into IIT. Okay, and I went for the counseling at IIT, and I discovered I was partially colorblind. And so I was in the dilemma because the guy said, "Yeah, you can join. It'll go down in your permanent medical record, and some careers and departments will be close to you, but it's by and large okay." Now, at that time, the country was shifting from class 11 to class 12 over a 3-year period, and because different states were shifting in different years over the 3-year period, the IIT folks had said, you can write the IIT entrance after class 11 and after class 12. And subsequently also, if you want to waste a year. Or I won't call it waste a year, that's politically incorrect these days. I say if you want to take a year doing something else while you're preparing. Like ambitious Indian, we said we'll get after class 11. So and everybody did that, right? So I studied hard after class 11 and I had gotten to IIT. And then for the first time in my life, I began to think, why do I want to go to IIT? Because, I was faced with a dilemma that if something happens and I have to drop out of IIT after 2 years, and I'm colorblind partially, then I won't even have a class 12 pass certificate. Right? And that bothered me. So then I had to go back to class 12 again to do something else. Right? So I thought about it long and hard, and then I took the difficult decision, of not going to IIT after class 11 and continuing class 12, saying, now my logic was simple. So mine was the last year in which you could write after class 11 and after class 12. So IIT was becoming a 4-year course instead of 5. And my junior batch couldn't write it. And all the good guys in my batch are already gone. So I said, I'll write it again. I'll get in again. And because there's no competition now, or less competition now, and I won't even waste a year, and I'll have a class 12, So that was my logic. And for that 1 year, I kept thinking, why do I want to be an engineer? And I came to the conclusion that, look, I didn't really want to be an engineer. I just wanted to be an IITian. Right? I didn't know what an engineer's job was, but I wanted the label. I wanted to join the club. I wanted the prestige of, getting into IIT. That was realization one. Realization two was, listen, getting into IIT is the hard part. Once you're in there, you can get out of it. I mean, you can graduate. I hadn't heard of anybody who flunked IIT. Right? So I already got into IIT. So, I had earned my spurs. So I was, I didn't know what an engineer did. I didn't know if I wanted to do that. All I knew was that I knew physics, chemistry, and maths, and I could study for an exam and pass it. Right? And as luck would have it, I got a decent marks in class 12. I got St. Stephen's College Economics. And I said, that is also a club. And I got into IIT again. So I got to IIT second time. I got into St. Stephen's College Economics. And I said to myself that, listen, ye bhi club hai, wo bhi club hai. Right? Both brands are good. Right? And this is 4 years, that is 3 years. And I had taken science with bio. So I was reasonably clueless about economics also. But I had just got in. And, it was a prestigious course. I said, that's the club I want to join. And I said to myself, why should I study 4 years for something I'm not passionate about, when I can study for 3 years something I'm not passionate about? Right? And in some sort of twisted logic, that made sense to me. And I chucked up the second admission and I went to St. Stephen's. And that's where the idea of Ashoka came from many years later, from my experience in St. Stephen's. It was I think, I don't know if it was the right decision. For the next 10 years, I was bewildered. What have I done? Have I taken the right decision or not? But life goes on, and things worked out okay. But growing up in government colonies gave you a certain value system. Going to St. Columba's School in the 70s gave you a certain value system. I wasn't the best student ever. So my elder brother was 7 years older than me, and he went to the same school. And so I went to the same teachers, right? And he always came first in class.
That's painful.
Yeah. And in my entire academic career, I have never come first in class. Not at Columbus, not at Stephens, not at IMA. There may have been individual papers I've done well in, individual exams I've done well in and come first, but on an aggregate basis, my highest rank was in class 5 or class 7, I forget. I came 5th in the class. My lowest rank, this is a class of 45, right? My lowest rank would have been 32. And I used to fluctuate between 5 and 32. So when I tried hard, I would come in the top 5, 6, 7. And when I didn't try hard enough, I came 32nd. My lowest rank was 32nd. I got it twice. But usually I was between 11 and 15. So I was getting by. But the thing about me was that I was just not that interested in studies. So whenever I tried, I'd do well enough to achieve my goal. So I did well enough in class 10. The important exam. I did well enough both the IIT entrances. I did well enough in class 12. I did well enough in the IIM entrance. So whenever it mattered, I would do well enough. Rest of the time, I would not try. So I kind of figured that, listen, I'll probably never do a PhD, right? I'm not that academically inclined. I would like to do something different. And that would usually be in a world where I'm actually doing stuff rather than studying stuff. So, and somewhere around, so how many of us daydream? Yeah, we are all daydreamers. I mean, it's a normal human thing, right? And my best daydreaming moments were when I was coming back in the afternoon from school. I was sitting in the school bus next to the window, looking out of the window, and the scenery would flash by, and I would daydream. Right. So when I was 10 years old, so when growing up, there was no television. I mean, there was television, but almost nobody had a TV.
And almost nothing to watch.
Well, they would do Doordarshan 3 hours a day, right? Black and white. In any case, television was considered evil, and movies were considered evil. Right? Your job was to read books, enrich your mind. Your job was to study. Your job was to play games. 3 things. Okay? And so I had seen maybe 1, maybe 2 movies in my life. Okay, before that. And both times with my parents, because we'd gone on vacation somewhere and greater family was going, so I was taken along. All the kids were taken along. So when I was about 10 years old, Chanakya Cinema had just opened in Delhi. Now it no longer exists. Now it's a mall. But Chanakya Cinema just opened in Delhi, and we lived close by. We lived in Chanakyapuri in the covered flats there. So I was allowed to go and see a movie with my friends without parental supervision. So we went and saw Rajesh Khanna movie. Hathi Mere Saathi. Okay. So I came back absolutely starry-eyed and said, I will be Rajesh Khanna when I grow up. Right? So futile dream, right? And I dropped it in about 6 months, and because around that time I saw the first, my first live cricket match telecast, test match telecast. And we crowding around, there were 2 TVs in the colony. We went to, one of them was my friend's house. We used to crowd around there, 8, 10, 12 of us, and watch some cricket. And I saw Sunil Gavaskar. And I said, when I grow up, I'll be Sunil Gavaskar. Futile dream, right? That lasted 6 months, And then somewhere I got in my head when I was 12 or 13 years old that, one day maybe I should be. See, there are kids who will do what their parents do and the kids who simply won't. Right? My father was a doctor and in the government. So I was pretty clear I will not be a doctor and I will not join the government.
Why is that? One of my questions was.
I have no clue.
No clue.
Okay, just I'll do something different. Right? So there are doctors' kids who become doctors, there are lawyers' kids who become lawyers. There are politicians' kids who become politicians.
And government servants' children want to become government servants in some way or the other.
Not all. I mean, clearly not.
Clearly not.
Okay. And somewhere got in my head when I was 12 or 13 years old that, maybe it's a good time to, it's a good idea at some point in time for me to start my own company. Those days, I'd never heard of the word entrepreneur. So it was my business. Why? Because I want to be independent. So I had this little rebellious independent streak in me where I wanted to do my own thing. Right? And this was a fuzzy dream that kept coming back to me. But by the time I was in class 11 or 12, it had crystallized a little bit further, saying, "Ha, ye definite goal hai, but kab karunga, kaise karunga, which business, when, how."
कौन सा business देखा जो आप?
No idea.
No idea.
No idea. Okay, but I remember first time I articulated to a friend in class 11 or 12. So there was this friend of mine, close friend, he's still a close friend, sitting next to me, may have been class 12. And he said, "What do you want to do in life?" And I said, I don't know what I want to do right now, but at some point in time, I think I'll start a company. I'll start a business. I'll be an entrepreneur. Okay. And I asked him, that was the first time I said to anybody. Otherwise, I'll just think it and not talk about it. And then I asked him, "What do you want to do?" He said, he was a brilliant student, really brilliant. He said, "I want to join AIIMS and become a doctor." And he did that. He got into AIIMS and he became a doctor. Now he's a very, very accomplished doctor. He's a pediatric oncologist, super specialized, went to the US for many years, now has come back to India. And so that sort of, once I had said it, I was more committed to it. And, it kept coming back. But, it was always this distant, karunga, kabhi karunga, baad mein karunga, abhi nahi. Because, coming from the background I came from, salaried middle class, only one salary in the house, there was never actually enough money in the house. So I had that yearning for security, financial security, and the salary check. But I said, kabhi na kabhi karunga. So finally, I think I worked for 3 years in Lintas, an advertising multinational company. I went for 2 years to Ahmedabad. Then I worked in GlaxoSmithKline, which was then called HMM. And I was in consumer marketing, handling the brand Horlicks. Right? And I think the futility of my existence was driven home to me in those 2 years, 1.5, 2 years at HMM. So HMM was this very professionally well-managed company and, all those things. and prestigious and paid well and air-conditioned office and all of that. And it was only one of two consumer good multinationals headquartered in Delhi. So you want to be in Delhi, you wanted to be in FMCG, you wanted to be in marketing, not sales. You were in the best job you could be in 1989, which is prior to liberalization, when Gurgaon did not exist as a office destination. So I was working there, and prior to liberalization, the multinationals are the hierarchy was oppressive, they were bureaucratic, there was no empowerment, there was very little creativity in your job in a consumer marketing company.
Even MNC.
Especially MNCs.
Especially MNC.
MNCs played safe, right? MNCs are controlled from the London office or the US office or whatever. So we couldn't buy a chair without approval from
London or whatever.
Yeah, because it was CapEx and CapEx had to be approved from London. So therefore you ask for an annual budget. And then you budget some for chairs, you budget some for this, and usme karo kaam, and if you run out of it, too bad, and now wait for next year. So you always ask for more, right? So that you had some buffer. So now Horlicks was the most important brand in the company, right? Company had brands like Horlicks, Boost, Brylcreem, Eno, Silvercream, Marmite, right? But Horlicks was 88% of company turnover and 140% of company profit. What it meant was that the CMD, an Englishman, he was the brand manager, not me. So that you could do nothing. So H&M would be run by company. No, by committee, sorry. So in the first of the month, there would be a purchase committee meeting. On the second of the month, there'll be a sales committee meeting. On the third of the month, there'll be a manufacturing committee meeting. On the fourth of the month, there'll be a marketing committee meeting. On the fifth of the month, there'll be a finance committee meeting. And on the sixth month, there'll be a management committee meeting. Now, roughly 80% of people who attended these meetings were the same. The remaining 20% of those people in that function, right? And I was too junior to be called into those committee meetings. I was product executive, right? However, we would quake with fear in that 1 week. They will ask for data, they'll ask something, be around, don't go away. And they ask for data, you better have it, and you don't have it, you're dead, right? Now, about 6 months before I joined, somebody had a bright idea in one marketing committee meeting, a non-marketing guy, saying, Horlicks is a bottle, the bottle has a label. The label is blue body, red border with a crest, right? India make gold is valued. So if you put a 0.5 mm gold line between the red border and the blue body of the label, it'll create value perception. Image badegi, sale badega, people get quality connotations, and all of that, all those good things. And then somebody else said, yes, you're right, but it is too big a risk. Horlicks is too important a brand. So let us do a test market of this new label. And we will do the test market now Horlicks was 26% of the sale was in Tamil Nadu and 19% was in West Bengal. And then there were other milk deficient states. Horlicks very often was a milk substitute. So Assam was important, Nepal was important, Karnataka, Andhra, all of Northeast, Odisha, Bihar, right? Important states. But Tamil Nadu was 26%, single state. So, yeah, but we should do it in our most important state, but not in the most important market. Full scientific decision making. So we will not do it in Madras. It is called Madras, then not Chennai. We will do it in Madurai. So the new labels were introduced in Madurai. This is all before I joined. I knew nothing about it. Now, typically in marketing rules and conventional marketing wisdom, say the test market is for 6 months. After 6 months, you assess and evaluate. So these guys introduced a label and they forgot about it. So I joined. I didn't know about it. I had no clue. 6 months after I joined in April, around October, the marketing manager came out of the marketing committee meeting in a flap. He just got his ear chewed by the CMD. So what happened to the rest of the test market? What happened to the test market? I said, what test market? The test market. Madurai, new label. What do you mean? I said, I know nothing about it. There's nothing. Nobody's briefed me. No. This is around 11 o'clock in the morning. You are catching the evening flight to Madras and you're catching the overnight bus to Madurai, and you're visiting the market, and you are going to find out what happened, how is the new level worked. So I said, listen, we have a Chocolateholics launch in 3 weeks' time. My life is a mess. There's a conference audio visual to be made. There is, TV commercials getting ready. There's a label getting printed. You can't do the TV commercial without a label. There's a new bottle. The product formulation at 3-4, you have to finalize the one. There's all the promotional material, POP, all that, point of sale material. There's no way I can leave Delhi. No, you're going. Anyway, I caught, I think, the 7 p.m. flight to, maybe the 6 p.m. flight to Madras. And I got off and I went straight to the bus station. And I bought a ticket on the spot to go to Madurai. Anybody here from Tamil Nadu? No? Okay. Anybody gone by bus from Chennai to Madurai? It's a terrible thing to do. It's a bad journey. No, there was no air conditioned buses. It was regular state transport corporation buses. And, in October in Madras, it is like muggy as hell, if I remember correctly. Right? So it's humid, it's hot, bus not air conditioned, and there's dust everywhere. And so I was caked with dust. At 4 o'clock in the morning, I couldn't sleep. At 4 o'clock in the morning, I got up off my seat. I went right to the back. I was hoping nobody would wake up. I took off my clothes and put on fresh clothes. I couldn't, bathe or anything. I couldn't shave. And we reached Madurai at 6 or 7 in the morning. I got up at the bus station. The local sales guy met me there. And he took me shop to shop. Now in 1989 in Madurai, if you try to speak Hindi, you get lynched, right? And those guys didn't know English. So I was talking to the sales guy in English and he was translating in Tamil. And I was saying, old label, new label, I'd taken the mock-ups. I'd taken and pasted on a board. Old label, new label, what do you think has made a difference? More customers buying? Is there a quality perception? And these guys were all laughing in my face. They're saying that, listen, you've come from Delhi to ask a stupid question. Go back and reduce the price if you want sales to go up. Your price is too high, right? In 2 hours, I had done about 30, 40 shops. And I said, yeah, boss, I've done the research. Now take me to the temple. So my mother had said, you're going to Madurai, you go to the temple. So take me to the temple, I mean, Meenakshi Mandir, Madurai. And I went there, did the parikrama, got the prasad, mom happy. I came back with the overnight train to Madras, caught the next morning, caught the daytime flight to Delhi, came back and I wrote a report saying, test market widely successful. Please extend label nationally. I mean, any fool knows it's not going to make a difference. You'd never do all this. But the futility of my existence was driven home by that trip. And I said, man, I didn't go to Ahmedabad for this. This is not what I want to do the rest of my life. Right? And that old dream was there. I'll start a business. I'll become an entrepreneur. Plus, so I began to think a lot. So I quit about 9-10 months later. I began to think a lot. I realized that I'm actually a prisoner of my visiting card. I want that multinational label. I'm a prisoner of my salary check. In those days, there weren't any cheap loans available. So otherwise, I would have been a prisoner of my EMI as well. And I said, I don't want this life. And so I quit.
That's lovely. And you've had now 30 plus years of being an entrepreneur. And what Ravi said, it's been a meteoric journey. But I'm sure the first 10,
not
15
meteoric.
years.
It's not, it looks meteoric in hindsight. But I think I drifted for about 7 years doing this and that. Then we not knocked. So I done 20 small things in the first 7 years.
So what have been some of the key highlights for you in this journey? And successes we know, but
so I think I got comfortable with drifting. I was used to a structured job, monthly salary. For 2 years, I was paralyzed with fear. Because I wouldn't know if I could. So look, we were operating on a servant quarter over the garage at home, my father's house, and we were living there also. And
you were married.
Yeah. So I would pay my father 800 rupees rent. I would insist he would not take it. I would insist. We had hired 2 peons, and we would pay the Bijli bill alag se. And in those days, there was an 8-year waiting list for a telephone, and there were no mobile phones. Landline, So my father had the luxury of having two phones because he's a doctor. So doctor got priority. So we had one phone in the clinic in the garage below, and I pulled a line, from the extension, and I would use that phone, and which was illegal in those days. You could not do it. I did it, right? And I would pay the phone bill. So the monthly kharcha would have been about 10, 15, 20,000 rupees. Right? And every month there was a challenge to even get that money. And I was taking a salary. Right? So for the first 2 years, I was paralyzed in fear. And I began to teach at management schools in the weekends around Delhi as visiting faculty to earn maybe 2,500 rupees a month. Right? And but after 2 years, I really began to love the independence. I got used to it. I was no longer afraid of the uncertainty.
And you'd gotten over the check at the end of the month.
Yeah, that's right. That is right. So, drifted. Salary surveys, databases, teaching, training, writing, whatever came my way to survive. Couple of small-time consulting projects. I had no particular specialization, and I was doing whatever work came to me. And in '97, we launched Naukri as seemingly one more small idea. There were only 14,000 internet accounts in the country then. Right? And
40,000 internet accounts. 14,000 internet accounts in the country. And you started an internet startup.
Yes. But I thought, see, I'll tell you, when I was in my last job at HMM, there were 7, 8, 10 of us marketing executives sitting in an open hall like this, right? No cabins, because of which I could observe what people were doing, and I could hear them talk on the phone, and we could talk to each other and discuss across the hall, right? And I used to observe that when the office copy of Business India would come in, the magazine, right? Everybody would read it from the back. Because there were 35 to 40 pages of appointment ads in the back of Business India in those days. It was the #1 appointment ad medium for managers. Right?
So appointment ad is job classified.
Job not classified, display ads.
Display ads.
Okay. Big ads. Okay. People who are paying a king's ransom for those ads to publish them. And I found that weird behavior. I said, yeah, they don't read the articles, they read the ads. And then they pass on the magazine. The article is interesting. And then they start discussing the job ads. And they're in a good job and they'll never apply. Because, like I said, you're in the best job you can be in Delhi if you're interested in FMCG and marketing and MNC. Get to discuss. So, insight number 1. Jobs are a high interest category of information. Even if you're not looking for a job, you will look at a job and you will discuss. Because all discussion will happen. But a job, what do you think? Aren't we so badly paid? They start bitching about the company. Which is, misplaced because the company was good, it paid well, it had good brands. And a second thing would happen that every week, 2 or 3 headhunters will call up and try and headhunt one or the other of my colleagues. Because it's a good headhunting ground. MNC hai, trade manpower hai, all people, IIMs hai, FMCG hai, So people try and headhunt. And I could hear this side of the conversation. And again, after the phone down, my colleagues would say, hey, this guy called me for a job, this job, whatever. They feel good about it. They never apply because they're happy in their jobs. So and every time it was a different headhunter with a different job in a different company, and these jobs don't advertised anywhere. So I figured that what appears in print is the tip of the iceberg. There's a massive market below the surface of the ocean, which is hundreds of headhunters, thousands of companies with tens of thousands of jobs. And jobs are a high interest category of information. So these 2, 3 insights stayed with me. In 1990, when I quit my job, I didn't know what to do with them. But when I saw the internet for the first time in '96, October, penny dropped in my head. And I said, if you were to just take jobs from all the newspapers and magazines around the country and put them up in one place for a month and keep it live and current, right? It will be a traffic magnet. People will come to see the site, see the jobs, because jobs are a high interest category of information. And which is what we did. We got 29 newspapers around the country and just put the jobs in our own format in our own words, and put it up on the net, and traffic began to come. Right? I'll give you one more story. When I met Deepinder Goyal for the first time, founder of Zomato, right, in May, June 2010. So I had been using Zomato. That one was called Foodie Bay. I'd been using Foodie Bay, and so had Hitesh Oberoi, who's my business partner and the CEO of InfoEdge, Naukri. And he'd also been using it, and he discussed it with me. He said, there's a great site called Foodie Bay. I'm using it. I said, I'm also using it. I love it. So what is great about Foodie Bay was it was the only restaurant site with all the menu cards. Yeah. The others had reviews, they had ratings, they had photographs. They did not have menu cards. They had address, phone number, support, but no menu cards. And actually, menu cards is the most important part because we could see the menu, see the prices, see the dish, and say, yahan jana hai, yahan nahi jana hai, and then decide. Right? So I reached out to Deepinder. I had not met him earlier. It was a cold call. And we met. And I asked him, the idea kahan se hai? Where did you get the idea from? Right? And he said, I was working in Bain Consulting in Gurgaon. He was 28 then, 5 years out of IIT. And in Bain, there were maybe 50 or 60 people working, mostly young, mostly male, mostly single, many living away from home. What it meant was they did not bring food from home. Right? Working as a consulting along, you typically end up having lunch and dinner in an office. Often at a cafeteria that would not serve food, but you could bring your own food and eat there. So to make life easy for the employees, the admin team had put 2 file folders there of the delivery cards, delivery menus of all the restaurants that will deliver there. Okay. And Deepinder said, her roz 1 baje line lag jati thi to access the files. It was a shared resource. You couldn't take it to your desk. You get the files for 3 minutes. You quickly see what you want to have. You call up the restaurant, you order it, and you come back after 1 hour when the food is delivered to eat. It's a waste of time. Very big pain. This is one Saturday I came in and I scanned all these menu cards and put them up on my personal page on the office intranet. And 2 days later, the IT infra guy came to me and said, man, what have you done? How come 98% of all internal traffic is going to your page? That's when the penny dropped, and I figured that this is everybody's problem, not just my problem. And that aggregation of menu cards got value. Just as I had learned 10 years ago, that maybe 15 years ago, the aggregation of jobs has got value. He learned that aggregation of menu cards got value. And he went on weekends and picked up all the menu cards of restaurants. And when he had 800, he put them on a site. And he called it Foodie Bay, and traffic began to come, and he quit his job. Okay. So the point I'm making from this story is that successful businesses are built on deep customer insights. Customer insights about what? About an unsolved problem, a need gap. If you solve an unsolved problem, you will hit a hot button. You won't have to sell, the customer will buy. And if you are in a situation where you're not selling, customers buying, you get your prices, you get your terms of trade, you get your margins, you get your profit, you get everything. Because you hit a hot button. Right? So the question is, can you identify those hot buttons? Can you identify that unsolved problem? Can you identify the need gap? Can you get that customer insight? There were 10 of us in the hall. We all saw people doing this in backwards. Only I. Are you observing enough? Are you curious enough? And do you have a deep customer insight before you launch any business, product, idea, whatever?
No, and you said your journey has not been meteoric. I think people sitting here and all of us have seen you from far, but there've obviously been lots of ups and downs even after you started Naukri, not the first 7 years of your entrepreneurship journey. When did you feel that now I've arrived?
So you never arrive, because there's always a new challenge. There's always a new thing to do. It's another day. You live for the day. But I felt financially secure for the first time around 2005.
Which is about 8 years after.
Which is 15 years after I quit my job.
But 8 years after Naukri.
See, most entrepreneurs have to struggle financially for a while. Very few, have it easy and get right the first time. Okay, and to achieve any great thing, there's always a period in the wilderness, and it's not just for entrepreneurs; it's for any great achievement in life. And I don't say I've achieved a lot. I'm not saying I'm a great achiever, but take a look at great achievers. Take a look at the people who fought for freedom of India. Mahatma Gandhi came back in 1915, right? 32 years to independence. 32 years in the wilderness. Not getting a salary. Didn't have a lot of family wealth. What kind of commitment did it take to achieve that outcome? So there will be a period of financial struggle, in all likelihood, if you want to achieve something significant, great, different on your own.
How does one manage, any mantra for all of us here? How does one manage during those tough times? How do you keep yourself up?
So you think before you enter, that is this something that I will stay with and I'll be committed to? Something I want to do for the rest of my life? It's something I enjoy doing, I love doing, even if I don't make money out of it. Even if I have to be always tightening my belt. And if the answer is yes, that's when you enter.
It's a problem I enjoy solving. It's something I want to be working on.
I don't mind spending the rest of my life doing this, even if I don't make money. I find meaning in what I do. So if you want to pursue an entrepreneurial path or an independent path, even if it's not for profit, but you want to be your own not for profit, right? You should look for meaning and not for money. So meaning will keep you both times.
Absolutely. Sanjeev, I'm conscious of time. It's almost 6. I can go on and on, but maybe if there's a hard stop at 10, we'll take some questions. Okay. So you want me to check it on the chat? Okay. I think someone's asking, how can one overcome the fear of failing of a startup before starting? As you've mentioned, for middle-class family, it's not easy to build businesses, got lots of constraints like capital risk, etc. I'm guessing that's been answered.
No, I think, look, the couple of nuances. First of all, dar to lagega, boss. Okay, it's natural. And if dar nahi lagega na, that means you're not afraid of failure. If you're not afraid of failure, then you will take risks that are unreasonable. So people say entrepreneurs are risk takers. No. Good entrepreneurs are risk averse, just as any rational person is. It's just that the entrepreneur's goal is different. So he may inherently have to take more risks than somebody else. But even then, on that path, he or she will take the lowest risk approach to that goal, should rationally. Right? Because you're afraid of failing. Because, in my business, when I started out, a rupee lost was a rupee out of my pocket, personally. There was no fixed salary. So in the first 10 years, for roughly 6 years, I didn't take a salary. 1993 and 97 to 2000. I was doing second jobs to earn money, to somehow survive. So look, you have to be frugal personally, right? Therefore, not spend too much money on yourself. Be in the business, in the organization, not for profit even, be very careful how you spend money. And you got to do more with less. So see, in the beginning, survival is success.
Yeah.
Right? And you will survive if you can meet payroll at the end of the month. Which basically means if you can keep costs low, hopefully you'll survive. Because your costs are in your control, your revenue is never in your control. You can influence revenue, you can hope for revenue, but there's no guarantee it'll come.
Thank you so much. Trisha.
But fear is good. It'll keep you motivated, you'll work harder. You will think of your business 24/7. You will work, you will do what it takes to make it happen. Don't be so crazy fearful that you're paralyzed, but fear is good.
So Trisha is asking an interesting question. She said consumer insight is super important, but there have been other Naukri and Zomato wannabes. So what sets Naukri and Zomato apart from them?
It actually is the consumer insight. Till date, no other site has got all the menu cards. Nobody else gets it. Right? वो फिर भी नहीं करेंगे.
Trade secrets.
Okay. So we not knock you with the insight that if you get all the jobs, if you get the maximum number of jobs, you get all the traffic, or you get a lot of traffic. Right now, this insight guided all our strategy. Right. So we understood that we are sitting on top of a virtuous circle. We've got the most jobs, therefore we get the most traffic. We get the most traffic, therefore we get the most response. We get the most response, therefore we get the most clients. We get the most clients, therefore we get the most jobs. It snowballs in our favor. Right? This is the manifestation of the network effect in our industry, the virtuous circle. In order to get the most jobs, we took all free jobs from everywhere. We priced it really cheap, 350 rupees single job listing, 6,000 rupees unlimited listings through the year for your company. We just wanted the most jobs and we wanted to survive. So it was costing us 2 lakhs, it was costing 1,80,000 rupees, 1,80,000 rupees a month to survive if I didn't take a salary. And I said 6,000 rupees. 6,000 rupees. Annual subscription. I need 30 subscriptions in a month, and I've broken even that month. I met my bills. I paid my bills. So we built a mailing list of 6,000 companies, HR managers. From all past ads we taken from newspapers, the appointment ads. So we knew who advertises. And I had read somewhere in Ogilvy and Advertising, one of the advertising books by David Ogilvy, that direct mail gives 2% response.
Yeah.
So 6,000, 2%.
120.
120. So 120 into 6,000 is 7,20,000. I need 1,80,000. Even now off by 75%. I've got Kachra in my mailing list, maybe. Right? I'll survive. And that's what we did. We survived. I would send out a one direct mail shot every month. Simple. Get the most jobs and survive. 1 lakh rupees. And I'd got the means to do it.
Yeah. So
and that's what we did. We just survived.
but follow up to that, Sanjeev. Somebody's asking, if my job doesn't allow a side hustle, then how do I go about it? I can't afford to leave my job right
Yeah. So I didn't do a side hustle. I taught at business schools on weekends to get some money after I quit my job. Deepinder did not do a side hustle. He took permission from his CEO. And
I mean, yes, that's what they mean. If your company doesn't allow you to.
yeah, I don't have the answer to that. I mean, you figure it out.
And that's why bootstrapping in some senses come. You just have to figure it out.
Yeah.
Your finances, friends, family.
Yeah, see if you can raise some angel money, see if you can get some friends and family money. Maybe you want to completely bootstrap. But you'll be surprised as to how little you can survive.
That's right. That's right. Any other questions? 2 more. I can't see. Why don't you read it?
So this is a question by Sharika. What would be your advice for social entrepreneurs in this situation of strict regulations with respect to FCRA and other government policies?
Well, actually, look, this is a problem which many not-for-profits are dealing with and facing. I would say if foreign funding is great, but so long as FCR is getting tougher and tighter, I mean, try and diversify your fund sources to Indian sources. One big source which the government has enabled in the last 5-7 years is CSR. This did not exist earlier. So we were in our company pretty clear that you cannot give away shareholder money. It doesn't belong to you. If you want to do philanthropy, do it with your personal money. So you're a shareholder. You've got dividend income, you've got a salary. You can sell some shares, go ahead and do it. You do personal philanthropy. But the moment it became compulsory, suddenly we are funding 30, 40 not-for-profits and our budget is 6 crores a year, 8 crores a year. From nowhere, from zero. Because now it's mandated. But we generally felt it wrong to give away shareholder money without asking the shareholders, because the company has got 30,000 shareholders. You can't just do it.
Fair enough.
Cool. So Bhavya is asking one book which you would recommend.
So look, I really haven't read a lot about not-for-profits, so I can't recommend books on not-for-profits, but there are two books I recommend, which I recommend to everybody. By this one author is common, Jim Collins, and it's both the books. One is called Built to Last, other is called Good to Great. What is it that makes sure an organization endures for a long, long time, built to last? The other is what is it that helps the organization transition from being merely good to being great?
Cool, thanks.
Any more questions?
Yeah, we have one more
But
from John.
they're management books. They're not not-for-profit books.
Yeah, that's fine. Like that was in general, they wanted to know about you. So one question from John, and he says that, is it okay to be like chaff in the wind and take whatever path excites you at the moment until you find something you're really passionate about?
Yeah, it's I think in my case, and I'm not saying I'm recommending to everybody, I drifted for 7 years till we got Naukri, and drifted for 3 more years till we raised venture capital. So in my case, drift was good. It worked. It enabled me to think of different things, do different things, taught me different skills, all of which came together when I did Naukri, right? And it may or may not work for everybody. And there was no guarantee that, and I also did not have a desire to do anything big. So I did not want to run a big company. I was very happy running a small company and getting by, because I did not have great financial goals. We launched Naukri in 97, and around 99, a whole bunch of venture capitalists were going to chase us, take our money, take our money. And I said, yeah, my life is very complicated if I take your money. And I said, no. Then in April 2000, we finally raised venture capital because competition had launched raising venture capital.
Monster, etc.
Jobs Ahead. And it was run by Ashish Dhawan, by the way, who's a very close friend now. And he's a co-founder of Ashoka. And we worked together on many projects, and we funded ISDM initially. He's been a big funder here. He funded Jobs Ahead. And that's when we said, okay, the game has changed. You can't compete with big money unless you raise big money yourself. Which is when we went back to the venture capital and said, okay. And once we did that, then we had to become big. We had no choice. I did not really want to run a big company. Yeah.
No.
Are there any more questions?
We can take one more. There's one more. If
Sure.
Cool, thanks. So this is around your journey as a philanthropist, Sanjeev. We heard about your journey as an entrepreneur. You fund many young philanthropists and young change makers. What is one advice which you would like to give to the youngsters who are venturing out in the social impact space?
2 things. Number one is do something which is a force multiplier. Right? Now, by force multiplier, I mean that it has disproportionate impact, that what you do catalyzes change in others. So Ashoka, for example, is a force multiplier for me. ISDM is a force multiplier because you're creating capacities. And people who graduate from here, graduate from Ashoka, will go out and hopefully some of them will do big things and make a change. Right? App like Hello English, I don't know if it's successful, is a force multiplier. You can teach yourself English. Is it working well, Tani? Okay. So, it's a force multiplier. It has an impact beyond just sort of giving money. So focus on being a force multiplier. Follow the money. Understand where the money is going to come from. And your customer is not the person you're impacting. Your customer is your donor. Right? So if you want to, if it's your passion and heart desire to make an impact in a certain area, do that, look at it, but first figure out who the donors will be, who will fund that. And that's your customer.
Right. No, thank you so much, Sanjeev. I'm again conscious it's 6:10. Fascinating insights across your journey, right from childhood to your entrepreneurial journey. I think 2 things that I'm personally taking away. First is, dar to lagega. I will remember that for a long time. Dar to lagega. And the other is, you'll be surprised at how little you can live on. And these are 2 amazing thoughts. So thank you so much for your time. One last thing, little tongue in cheek. You started Jeevan Sati. You also funded Happily Unmarried. There's no dissonance in the two.
Different offerings, different market segments.
Are you hedging your bets? No. Thank you so much.